Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. We begin in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, and we send peace and salutations upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Welcome to an episode of Hot Colds, where the premise is of our show is from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that a time of patience will come upon a people when holding on to one's religion is like grasping onto hot coals. Today, alhamdulillah, we have a special guest, Imam Dawud Walid, and we're going to discuss the necessity for Muslims to hold on to their faith despite their tests and trials and delusions of political power from the right or the left, as all power belongs to Allah. We're going to discuss how to navigate through American politics through the lens of an Islamic guidance, and what is sacred activism, its examples and applications, and discuss the recent protests and rallies that were against LGBTQ agendas being taught and indoctrinated in schools, and how one could be steadfast in one's religion for individuals, groups, and from individuals, groups, and ideologies that attack Muslims and or Islam. Alhamdulillah, Imam Dawud Walid is a Michigan-based Islamic teacher, researcher, and civil rights leader. Imam Walid has lectured at over 100 institutions in higher learning in North America, Great Britain, and West Africa about Islam and racial justice. He previously served as an Imam at Majed Behaibih, Muhammad in Detroit and the Bosnian American Islamic Center in Hamtramck, Michigan. He's the author of the books Blackness and Islam and Towards Sacred Activism, and co-author of the books Censoring Black Narrative, Black Muslim Nobles Among the Early Pious Muslims, and Censoring Black Narrative, Ahlul Bayt, Blackness in Africa. His writings have been featured in the Spirits of Black Folk, Sages Through the Ages, as well as essays in the 2012 book All American, 45 American Men on Being Muslim, as well as a 2014 book, Quran in Conversation. So with that, we welcome to the program Imam Dawud Walid. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
So as we were saying in regards to how Muslims can be steadfast in their religion and not being swayed too much from the politically right or left, is there anything you could like to contribute into this factor?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. First of all, it's a pleasure to be on your podcast. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless it and expand the listenership that's trying to disseminate khair to people within the ummah and even those outside of the Muslim community who may be listening. So I think that when we're talking about the issue of political engagement of the American Muslim community, before getting down to issues of creed and even of the Sharia, I think there's something else that's fundamental to the issue of how Muslims engage politics, and that much of it is reactionary and is driven by a fear, right? So we are very reactive people, and much of our politics we don't see ourselves as leaders, because the Quran says of us what we're supposed to be is kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nasi ta'muruna bil-ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises us. It says you are the best nation brought forth for humankind. Why? Because you enjoin what is good. This is proactive. You forbid what is evil. That's somewhat reactive, right? And you believe in the oneness of Allah. And the tartib of this ayah of the sequence is in fact very interesting, right? So we're supposed to be leaders, but in fact, we're very reactive in how we deal with politics. So this is a psychological issue in regards to how we prioritize issues. I think that much of it, and I'm saying this, by the way, number one, not prefacing that I have all the answers, but this is like observations I'm making journaling. Number two, the people who are engaged, I take all my Muslim brothers and sisters that they have sincere intention. So I'm coming from a perspective of husnul dhan. At the same time, one of my teachers told me about 25 years ago, he said, Dawood, remember, you can be sincere and be sincerely wrong, right? So the question then becomes, what's our metrics of how we prioritize things within the Muslim community? That where are our issues locally, statewide, nationally, and internationally? How do we actually prioritize things? What is the what are the standards, right? And then also the standards, which I have some ideas or a proposed metrics for some standards, and I talked about this at the latest ICNA Mass Convention. But also with that, having the confidence and courage to stand by certain principles, irrespective of whether people on the left or the right like it, right? And this is a spiritual issue, because courage is a spiritual virtue. It's a virtue of futuwah, of sacred chivalry, and the opposite of it, the muqabil of it, is jubl, which the Prophet ﷺ sought refuge from, and that's a spiritual malady. Like, that's a disease. Cowardice is a spiritual malady, right? So this is an issue beyond like an usuli issue of like, what are our standards of judging our priorities, or even this whole issue of maslaha mafsada discourse that some people say the lesser of two evils. Sometimes the evils really aren't lesser. It's like saying, I don't like shaitan, so I'm going to vote for the Dajjal. Sometimes there is no real lesser of two evils, right? But then also, like, the spiritual fortitude to say, you know what, we don't need to be with any camp, and we don't care whether either political side likes it, right? We're not trying to offend people, but really we don't care, because we believe that we're on the haq, and they're not on the haq, right? So that's more of a spiritual issue.
I think that's a beautiful point that you were making, that it's an issue of the heart, right? I think when the heart is able to acknowledge the need for change, the need to get closer to Allah, the need to be stronger in faith, and have things such as courage, and that only comes from Allah, and seeking that from Allah. Right? The Prophet ﷺ taught us that, verily there's a flesh. If it's sound, then the rest of the body will be sound. And verily it is the heart. And one of the du'as of the Prophet was constantly, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik. Oh, turner of hearts, make my heart firm upon your religion, upon your deen. Because at times you'll change, and at times situations around you may change, but you're asking to be continuously steadfast in the religion. So that's a very beautiful point. And it just reminds me of the ayah of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that, those who are merciful to the believers, they're stern against the disbelievers. They don't fear the blame of those who cast blame. No. So it's stern in the sense of, being steadfast upon the truth, not being worried about what people are going to say about you. Right. And I think for far long, yes, I think it's absolutely right. You hit it on the nail. And it's a general observation, right? And not to take shots at our brothers and sisters whom we love, right? We show mercy towards. But, the Prophet ﷺ said the believer to the believer is a mirror. And if you see something wrong, you try to help them. And I think it's for far too long, it's been somewhat of fear. Only just, siding with people only for their own personal benefit, or little benefits here and there. But I think what happened in these protests, and a lot of it took place in Michigan, where you're from, and really the whole nation, if not the world, was looking at Michigan like, wow, man, these guys are doing it. And I think because for far too long, people will remain silent on the issue. And they realize, like, it's time for us to wake up. It's time for us to stand upon our principles. I'm not going to say, what they did or how they did, and you're more aware of that than me. What was good and what was some of the things that could have been better. But I think the necessary stance was definitely there.
Yeah, so I want to kind of like make a parallel, or we could say compare and contrast, between how Muslims in Michigan earlier on in the year were protesting certain books regarding same-sex attraction, and that were lewd and lascivious, that were in schools with access to minors. How that was done in Michigan in comparison to what's been going on in Montgomery County in Maryland, because the tipping point for both were parents speaking out, as well as community members, people concerned about their children. So the reality is, we've never been American Muslims going out protesting against so-called pride parades. The community wasn't really vocal against same-sex marriage being legalized, right? The tipping point in both from Michigan and Maryland was relating to people's kids and people's children. People feeling like their minor children should not be introduced to lewd and lascivious, sexually explicit material, and or something that is normalizing munkar, right? So both of these were motivated by the same thing. I think that the I will give some praise and critique, right, for both. So in Montgomery County, Maryland, mashallah, the protests have been more organized and more refined, and the comportment or the adab of the protesters was better. It has been better in Montgomery County over the several protests than what we saw in Dearborn, Michigan, in which some people got raucous and were yelling at people and calling people names, which of course that's not from prophetic character. We know the Prophet ﷺ dealt with very hostile people in Mecca and Medina, and he never got into shouting matches with people or calling people bad names, right? So in Dearborn, the adab was not as good as what we see in Maryland. Lakin, what's different in Dearborn than Montgomery County is this. In Montgomery County, parents are just saying, we want to be able to opt our children out of certain curriculum or access to certain books. Whereas the parents in Dearborn took a stronger stance that no, these books shouldn't be in the schools at all. It ain't about opting our children. It's about these things are lewd and lascivious. They're immoral. They should not be being morality, sexual morality should not be taught to minors at all, right? So, I have respect for what's going on in Maryland, but for really, if we see ourselves as leaders, it shouldn't just be, oh, well, let individual parents opt children out from curriculum that's bad or like homosexual books. It should be, no, lewd and lascivious sexual materials should not be made available to children, period. So there's no opt-out. It shouldn't be in the schools at all. And in that, I think the Muslims here in Dearborn are actually stronger. And I think taking a more Islamically appropriate stance under the guidance of El Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, enjoying the good and forbidding the evil. It's not. It's. I personally think that, and it's not taking shots at anyone there, or even some of my colleagues, but leadership demands more from us than just saying, oh, just showing some sort of passive disagreement about, well, give me the right to opt out my children. No children should be exposed to that sort of rubbish. And I think that's the more Islamically sound position. If we are going by the hadith and Sahih Muslim and others by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anh, if you see a munkar, you change it biyadi. You try to change it. If you can't resist it, bilisani. You speak out against it. This is enjoining good and forbidding evil. It shouldn't be in there. But if you're unable to do that, resist it in your qalb, right? Your heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. But that's the weakest of faith, just feeling bad about it, right? So no, we're supposed to be like, we may not have the political authority to change it biyadi, but we should be saying, no, these books shouldn't be available for any children at all. Right. That's more in line with the prophetic paradigm.
I agree, and I think what happens is, in regards to the prophetic paradigm, we're like, it's more about like you want the best for everyone and not just for yourself. In regard to the opting out, it's like I succumb to this too. We just want to keep putting ourselves into a box. We just want to avoid the evil as much as possible. But it gets to the point where it's like, right, we have the truth, we have Islam, we have something that is beautiful, that is guidance to humanity, and it's time that I think we go and show that out to the people. And there's ways to show that are proactive, and then instances like this where it's reactive, but both are necessary. And I do think we need to take some more proactive approaches. But yes, Jazakallah khair for that. I want to get into sacred activism, Imam Dawud. You wrote a book about it. It's a very intriguing title and name. Tell us a little bit about the book and what is sacred activism.
So, my book that I wrote, the second volume or the second edition, excuse me, should be coming out soon. I sent it to the publisher. Sacred activism is kind of a response to what I start seeing going on in the activist world, where many activists, including popular activists in our community, were being involved in activism and still are in using the ends justify the means framework for activism on certain issues, especially certain so-called social justice issues, getting into quid pro quo type of activism because certain groups seemingly support us against Islamophobia or the issue of Palestine, that then we make all sorts of concessions in quid pro quo, and even the means that we use of addressing legitimate concerns or sometimes the ends don't justify the means as far as how campaigns are done, lack of etiquettes and things like that. So this is why I wrote towards sacred activism, that the word sacred is very important, because harma, which is sacredness, is related to the word haram, which means there are some parameters that are set as far as within the sacred. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his book and through the tongue of the messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave us these sacred parameters of what is halal, what is haram, what is mahruf, what is munkar, what is from the recommended and what is from the despised. And this is the framework that we have in our deen, not just following trends of what's trendy. So that's kind of the backdrop behind why I wrote towards sacred activism.
Jazakallah khair. And then the article, Navigating Differences. What is it for those who are not aware? What was your thoughts on it, your take on it? And I think we'll take it from there.
So an article came out, Navigating Differences, or a paper. I was one of the editors of it, as well as a signatory of it. And it came out like late May, early June. And it was a paper trying to clarify sexual ethics inside the American Muslim community. And this is primarily fueled by a response of parents and what parents need in regards to the onslaught and the growth of LGBTQ material and information or the propagation of that movement to children and in schools. Like, parents are asking, like, we need something in writing, and we need some guidance to deal with this issue. And it was also to give clarity to people in the activist and organized community, as well as some Muslim politicians who, frankly, gone outside of the pale of normative traditional Islam and have taken positions that are heterodox, or dare I say, positions of zendiqa, right? Positions of heresy. So it was, number one, to give parents and those who are concerned some written material that then could be passed on to schools, which is very clear, right? Or at least to give guidance to parents about how to talk about the issue. And then also to give guidance to people who are involved in political activism, including politicians. And of the crux of it, a lot of it had to do with issues of those who seek to propagate same-sex attraction and also gender dysphoria, right? So that's what the clarity was on. Like, for instance, nothing that's haram or considered sinful can ever be posited as a meritorious identity, right? That's part of the movement. Like, it seeks to make a core identity of people what they do sexually. Like, this is like unheard of in the history of like human beings, right? Especially when we're talking about things such as sodomy and lesbianism and things like that, right? So it's giving clarity on of these issues, the normative position, and there were approximately 300 signatories to it, men and women, some prominent ulema, some sisters who study traditionally, as well as men from the du'at, from the imams or the preachers who signed on to it, predominantly in America, but some also in Canada.
And I think it was a beautiful article for many different reasons. And I think the primarily main reason why I found it very beautiful, and is the only one that I'll talk about now, is that it was beautiful to see all the different signatories on there, right? And it was primarily the imams, the mashayikh, the scholars, the active, to see them all on there to take a stance on something together. I think that was the real beautiful part of it. Because so often we see organizations take a stance, or we see individuals, but to see it to come from our religious leaders was really something profound. And in the United States, I think we have a huge advantage as opposed to those in other countries, is that there's protection of religion here. So we can take a stance on something that we believe is a part of our religion and not really have to worry so much of the backlash. And we know if we do something for the sake of Allah, Allah will open up for us ways and protect us and so on.
Yeah, I'd like to address one of the criticisms, which I think is a red herring. Some people said, well, how come the Mashayikh didn't get together and put a statement out against racism or anti-Black racism, or abuse, domestic violence and abuse against women? Why about this issue? Like, is this a priority? So, number one, there have been various statements that have been put out. I mean, there was one that was put out about imams for racial justice, like after George Floyd was murdered. There's been statements put out regarding abuse of women and spousal abuse or domestic violence. But I think the difference, there's also a qualitative difference, though, when people bring this red herring up. If you were go into the broader society, including the Muslim community, if you say racism is wrong, everyone will say yes. Now, the specifics of how we define racism or what is racist, there's some debate on that, right? But everyone will say racism is wrong. If you go into the community and say it's okay to, is it okay to abuse women and beat up women or sexually assault women? Everyone categorically say that's wrong, right? But this issue of sexual identity has become very muddied and very confused in the community on a general baseline, number one. Number two, no one's introducing into schools and the children that racism is good. Even Republicans don't do that, who are against like certain curriculum or critiques of critical race theory, whatever. They're not saying racism is good or want to teach racism to kids, like explicitly. No one is going to schools for kids and say it's okay to beat up women. However, this agenda is proactively trying to teach children that the so-called LGBTQ plus, all these different alphabets, is good and should be affirmed and should be celebrated. And a number of the books have very graphic material, like this book is gay, or the book called The Flamer. So there's a real qualitative difference. So when people brought up this red herring, it's either they're ignorant or they have an agenda to push this stuff inside of our community, like the Muslims who've complained. It's one or the other. It's either they're ignorant of like the fiqh al-waqi', like the facts on the ground, or maybe some of these people, because their organization or they are getting paid and getting money from certain far left foundations and organizations, or from political action committees affiliated with the Democratic Party. Maybe they have an agenda with inside our community. I think it's partially both, because there's a definite agenda in which certain people and certain groups are not funded by the grassroots of our community, or they did not get their seed money from the grassroots community. They got their money from Open Society Foundation, George Soros, and a number of other foundations. And if we did a report on follow the money of some of these groups that have been propagating sexual confusion, you'd see that a lot of their money they're getting from these groups. They're not getting funded from the grassroots of the Muslim community, right? And I think that we need to push back on that. And I'm not going to call any of their names because out of my position at CARE Michigan, however, I know some of these prominent people and these organizations. I know where they get their money from because I've been in meetings and I've seen how they got money and how we didn't get money because I wasn't going to agree to the so-called intersectionality framework to get that money, right?
And what's interesting is this happens at many levels. So there's a couple of things I wanted to unpack right there, and I know you're a little crunched for time, but I remember being in college, like 15 years ago, and there was we had a club mass on campus, and it was basically there was already the ISO, there was an Islamic organization doing events, but there's nothing really about activism. So they decided, okay, let's do mass on campus. Like, okay, sisters really pushed for it. They said, oh, there's this social club that wants to work with us about Islamophobia. We said, okay, the sisters were kind of just running the thing. We said, no problem. Majed, they said, we want you to be the host of the event. No problem. We invited Imam Khalil Latif. It was a good talk about Islamophobia. Then the social club had their speaker. Now, their speaker, we were a little suspect because, you know, she was pro-LGBTQ, which we didn't know until the event.
Was she Muslim?
No, she wasn't Muslim. Okay. She wasn't Muslim. So they decided to work with this non-Muslim group. And it's okay to work with other groups, but you have to know who you're working with and what agenda are they trying to push. And they failed to, I mean, young college students, they failed to do the background on this. And me being gullible, being naive, okay, what's this event? Okay, we're doing good. She stood with us on every point in regards to Islamophobia, but she was very clear at the end of the event. Oh, you know, we stood for you guys. Now you need to come stand for us. And I remember the perplexed faces in the crowd from the Muslim community. Like, what? And so it was a huge lesson to us at that age. And alhamdulillah, that test came at that stage, as opposed to those who are much higher, politically affiliated, where wealth is thrown into it, that fitna is coming through. And, you know, our topic being hot cold, right? Holding on to our faith. I think it goes back to what you said, the heart, right? If our heart is firmer in religion, we'll recognize this as it is. It's like when you have the whisperings of the shaitan, you remember Allah's name, then it's clear what's going on, right? It's clear that there's an attack here, right? And I think same thing on a higher agenda in regards to, you know, where these organizations or individuals are getting money from. And I remember walking in downtown Brooklyn next to Majed Farouk, where I'm at, and we had no clue, but there was a Ramadan festival. This was like probably 10 years ago. Like, oh, Ramadan festival. Like, how come the Muslim community, our community in the area didn't know about it? We look at it 2 blocks away. It's next to the clock tower. And it was funded by the Rothschilds. And it had nothing to do with Islam. It was like hookahs and carpets. Supposedly they had a belly dancer. And nobody in there had hijab or like appeared to be Muslim at least. But this was the Ramadan festival that they were pushing. So it shows you there's a clear agenda, clear attack on our faith. And it's like they want you to conform to what they think the faith should be.
Yeah, it's not even a secret. It's Rand Corporation did a report, and it came out either in 2006 or 2007. You can look it up online, and they literally talked about how to remake the Muslim community from within. And they literally talked about this, you know, about how they would deploy, slowly trying to remake the Muslim community from within and funding certain endeavors and certain people. And there were certain people in our community that were duped and used, you know, a part of agenda. I remember telling one prominent activist 5 years ago that, you know, she was working hard and she was working hard for someone else, and she didn't even know it. I think she ended up finding out because of some circumstances that took place. But this is a real issue, in our community of outsiders doing things. Also, another point, I think one of the beauties about the navigating differences, and I'm not on social media. I haven't been on about 2.5 years because I found it to be too toxic. But from what people share with me on certain things and even certain local discussions I heard after talking with people, and they were updating me on things, is that this statement really gave us clarity on where people stand. And I think it's good that people in the community, number one, saw who the signatories were, who made statements against the statement, right? What was their rationale for why? And then those people who are prominent in the community who were asked to sign it and strategically stayed silent, and you don't see their names on it. I think this showed a lot to our community where people stand, and it really has highlighted how some people really see being Muslim as Muslimness. So Islam is not a deen; it's more of like a quasi-ethnic, social, political identity. It's Muslimness. It's not like, huh?
I was gonna say kind of like what some Jews describe today. Like, oh, I'm Jewish by ascription, but as regards to practice, it's not relevant. Like some Jewish sects have taken that route.
Well, correct. Actually, the majority of Jews in America, Jewish Americans, say they don't believe in the God of Abraham. So it's become like it used to be generations ago a majority religious community. Now it's just an ethnic identity, and their qibla is Israel, like a secular nation state. And so we've seen the unraveling of certain people who talk about Muslims as Muslimness. And it's not about the Quran. It's not about the Sunnah. It's not about Ijma. It's not about Ati Allah wa Ati Rasul. Right? It's not about obedience and submission. As Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani al-Hanbali said, Haqiqatul Islam al-Istislam. The reality of al-Islam is submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the commands of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So we've seen those who have no mish ihtiram. They don't really have any respect for that. It's they don't have respect for tradition. It's either we can reinterpret the deen the way we want, or even we don't even care about even bringing forth any adillah or any hujjah for the positions. It's all about we got to be in solidarity. We have to support our allies. It's about love and compassion. And all of these very superficial emotional appeals that have nothing to do with Iman, Islam, and Ihsan from Hadith Jibril alayhi salam, which, in order to have proper deen, we have to have all three of these components, right? So I think the navigating differences statement had a hidden benefit besides the explicit maqsad of why it was written, to give clarity to our community.
Right, and it's like like when you're pressure cooking or you're making diamonds, you have to have that pressure in order to get the diamonds out, right? And not everyone's gonna make the cut, unfortunately. And may Allah keep us steadfast into His pleasure. And I think in the hereafter, people are gonna realize, how come I didn't take this stance? How come I didn't, and we know in our deen, is it to Islam Jamia? Is it to, excuse me, and is it to Lillah, right? The honor is from Allah, it comes from Allah. So we should be going back to the source in order to seek that honor, and not seeking it through other ways, thinking that these superficial terms, like you were saying, are going to lead us to that, because it's not. And Umar bin Khattab was very clear at the opening of Masjid al-Aqsa. He said, we were people that we were disgraced before Islam. And if we take honor from anything besides Islam, Allah will disgrace us again. Imam Dawud, thank you so much. And if there's any last words you can give the viewers in regards to how can they hold on to their faith in regards to, navigating the political streams and the different ways that they're being combated from their religion on the right and the left?
Very simple advice. Number one, learn your deen, right? Learn the basic aqidah of Islam. Number one, this will help in firmly establishing in our hearts or reestablishing the sources of our deen, of where we get objective truth from, not just simply what's subjective or speculative. Number one. Number two is that the way we get this deen is that we get it from qualified teachers, of people who studied and have ijazah and senate, who learn from teachers, who learn from teachers, who learn from teachers, going back to the early scholars and the salihin of our tradition, back to the early generations of Muslims, back to the Sahaba, back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So studying, but also from the sources of whom we study, not just picking up books of our own or watching videos, is also very important. Anyone who's involved in activism must do this, because of the conditions of enjoining good and forbidding evil is one must have knowledge of what is mahruf and what is munkar, right? And the third of these is keep good suhbah, right? That the company and association one keeps, and especially those who are involved in activism, should not just be involved in activist echo chambers, right? You have to go to the masjid. You have to be in majalis al-dhikr. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name is remembered, the Quran is being recited, going for salah, going for muhadarat, and being around people who are reminding you and reminding me of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if anyone is in a majlis in which Allah and his messenger, they sit through a gathering and Allah and his messenger is never mentioned, and you're amongst fellow Muslims, then you know that this is a bad majlis. It's not somewhere to be sitting, right? And it doesn't matter how popular the activists are, if they led a nationwide march or have books or been on TV or in the New York Times or MSNBC, whatever. That's not the litmus test, right? So we have to be in suhbah that is a suhbah salihah, right? And righteous, upright suhbah. These are the three things that I recommend for the viewers, as well as for the faqir recommends for his sinful self.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair, Imam. I mean, subhanAllah, it reminds me of the hadith of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and with this, that the good friend's like the one who sells oil, right? You might benefit from the smell, you might purchase some, he might give you some for free, and then the bad friend is like the one who deals with coal. He gets you dirty, or the smell goes on you, or you just don't want to be around that bad smell. And subhanAllah, even in our activism, we have to be aware of those who are around us, those who are our friends. Jazakallah khair. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Do pick up a book of the book Futawa. Also, Sacred Activism is out there as well. Second one is coming out soon, as Imam Dawud mentioned. Jazakallah khair, Imam Dawud. Appreciate your time. Subhanallah, bihamdik, shadu la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان في خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Be sure to check us out on the Roku channel, YouTube channel. Like and subscribe. We have the iTVusa app on your Apple and Google Play stores. I'm Dawud Walid. Thank you so much.
Alhamdulillah, my pleasure.